Sorry, a tad late. I think this morning in Nassau County, and they were a little bit more time consuming than I thought. It started a little later than I thought, but raced over here, so very good to kind of told them this.
Yeah, I will go. Hi, I'm Rachel Gervaldi. I'm Congressman Grothman's Chief of Staff. It's good to see everyone today. Thank you for coming out. Just want to run through our program and how we kind of do things, and then we'll stand and do the pledge together. First of all, the Congressman always gives an update on what's going on in Washington and what he's working on, both there and in the district. And then we go into a question and answer period. During that question and answer period, you should have all submitted your cards with your name on it. They will be randomly drawn out of a bucket by Sadie, our Deputy District Director. And once she calls your name, you can stand up and ask a question, or sit and ask a question, whatever is most comfortable for you. And the Congressman will answer that question for you. If you have not received the form where you'll have to put your name on it to put it in the bucket, just raise your hand and one of our staff will get you one to fill out. If everyone has them in, then we'll randomly select them. Just a reminder that while we're here, don't clap or speak over anyone because it's hard for other people to hear. Since we do have a bigger crowd today, the more people that are talking, when other people are talking, then they can't hear everything. And it's the best part of this forum is for everyone to hear the answers and the questions. So if everyone could stand up, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then I'll turn it over to Congressman Grothman to bring up the thing.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Here's Congressman Grothman.
Okay, well, like Rachel said, can everybody hear me, by the way? I talk kind of low, so I know from past, I might go back into, because especially with the microphone, I would assume you can hear me. But if you're in the back row and can't hear me, just wave your hand and I'll dial up again a little bit more. Like Rachel said, this is our town hall, and I'll lead it off by talking a little bit about what's going on in Washington, and then open it up for questions. Like in Madison, when I was a state legislator, most of the work that we do, or time-wise, is done in committee. You noticed in the paper that in the elections in November, the Republicans lost the majority. I have a lot of friends who are Democrats that want to get things done this cycle, but so you understand, because I didn't realize this until I was involved in politics, it matters a great deal which party is the majority in either house. If you are the majority party, it not only, first of all, it means that on the floor, you determine which bills we're going to have votes on, okay? So when I get back to Washington in a couple weeks, Nancy Pelosi, who is the Speaker of the House, will determine what bills are available to be voted out of the House and which bills are not. The majority party also determines the committee chairman of every committee. So when I attend a hearing, what that hearing is about is determined by, always right now, a Democrat congressman. In one thing I'll complain a little bit about here, about my good friends, the Democrats. I think we were a little bit nicer to them when we were in the majority than when they were in the majority. When we were in the majority, I think we did a pretty good job of making sure, unless they had a very important committee, a lot of the Democrats were able to have 3 committees. In my first 2 terms, I had 3 or 4 committees. This time, almost all Republicans have to drop that from 3 committees down to 2 committees. And the 2 committees that I selected were, first of all, the Education and Labor Committee. I've always been very concerned about education, and labor law interests me as well. The committee chairman on that committee is a guy by the name of Bobby Scott from Virginia, a Democrat, who represents the part of Virginia along the Atlantic Ocean. He's got some big shipbuilding facilities in his district. I think I get along with him very well, and I'm looking to have a very productive session with him. On oversight, the committee chairman is a guy by the name of Elijah Cummings. He represents Maryland, kind of the area along, kind of adjacent to the District of Columbia. A lot of federal employees there. And I have a good relationship with him as well. I gave up the budget committee. I didn't want to do it, but the budget committee, while it sounds important, isn't quite as important as it sounds. And there are rumors, which are so far true, the Democrats may not even pass a budget, in which case the committee really becomes kind of irrelevant. So I decided to give up the budget committee. I kept the education and labor committee and the oversight committee. As far as things that we've done so far, I think the most prominent thing that happened in the first 3 months was the shutdown. I'll explain to you my opinions on that. I think a wall is very important. A lot of decisions are made behind the scenes, and I disagreed with the idea that we would shut down the government, quite frankly, at this time. And something I don't know that appeared in the paper, but Donald Trump, of course, ran on a wall, and in order to build a wall, you want to have Congress appropriate money for a wall. For his first 2 years in office, he did not get a wall. We voted for a lot of appropriation bills, but the wall was never in there. We were told that Donald Trump wanted to build the case for the wall in Washington when we have a budget, unlike in Madison. Unless we appropriate money, the government shuts down. So what happens in Washington, we're supposed to always have a budget done or appropriation bills done by October 1st. That hasn't been done at any time in the recent past. So what happens is we have to pass continuing resolutions and keep spending the same amount of money as the prior year. We had done continuing resolutions until almost the end of December. President Trump wanted us to pass another continuing resolution through the middle of February, and he could build the case for the wall in his State of the Union address. I thought that made sense, particularly if President Trump would promise us that he would at that time say, I'm not going to sign any more appropriation bills unless the wall was built. But there was an internal argument among Republicans who got tired of us not doing enough, which I certainly sympathize with, and a decision was made that we would not pass any more continuing resolutions in December. And that's how we wound up with a shutdown. The major disagreement was whether or not there'd be funding for a wall. I thought President Trump was very much willing to compromise. A lot of you are aware there was a time where they talked about a wall costing $20 to $25 billion. President Trump came all the way down to $5.7 billion. I went down and looked at the wall myself. I talked to the head of the Border Patrol under Barack Obama. He was very adamant that we needed a wall. He felt it would cost a minimum of $8 billion. So President Trump was asking for less money than President Obama's Border Patrol person said. Even that $8 billion figure would not have covered the entire border. There are a lot of mountains there that would be tough to come across. But I talked to Adam Kinzinger, who was a member of the Wisconsin National Guard, a congressman from Illinois. He said when we're allowed to patrol the border, that he saw people climbing over those mountains. So I think maybe $8 billion was enough. But Donald Trump tried very hard to compromise. Eventually they shut down the government because we didn't have a continuing resolution. The Democrats were not going to go to $5.7 billion. Finally a compromise was reached, but I thought made the law worse than it currently is. What the compromise did is it gave a little bit of money for a wall, but it also said that in the future, if you are here illegally and have a minor under your care, you could not be kicked out of the country. Given that we already know that people are coming in this country with children that are not their own, they sometimes take somebody else's children because they know it's less likely to be kicked out if they have a child. I think what this means is that if you catch somebody, say a member of a drug gang or something, they will just make sure that they have a child with them. But in any event, eventually the government shut down. During the shutdown, I fought to see if we could get the people who were working, get them paid, kind of an odd thing with the shutdown. Certain people who are necessary personnel continue to work. Examples of that would be the TSA agents over on Lake Michigan. It would be the Coast Guard. They don't get paid during the shutdown. They get paid when it's over, which I thought was ridiculous. They should pay them overall. In a bill I disagreed with, Congress passed a bill during the shutdown then saying when the shutdown's over, everybody always gets paid 100%. I don't mind paying something to the people who aren't working, but I felt paying 100%, given that the shutdown could have gone for 3 or 4 months, I thought getting paid 100% if you're not working really wasn't right. That's not what would happen if you were laid off at another job, unemployment. I was willing to go higher than unemployment, but not 100%. That was kind of the most high profile thing that happened. As far as things I hope to get accomplished, the Education Committee, there's a possibility of a reauthorization of the higher education bill. There are 2 things I want to see in it. I want to have us aim more for what I call skills-based education. We have too many people out there who go to college, get a big student loan, and are not making enough money to pay back that student loan. Meanwhile, we have huge shortages in areas like manufacturing, medical field, nursing. I would like to have more people getting jobs. Another thing I would like to have is once you get a student loan, I'd like you to be able to refinance that and lower the interest rate. That's something that we are not doing right now. Is this thing working, by the way?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask
It's
you,
not
could you please
working
speak
real
up a
well.
little bit louder?
Okay, maybe it just isn't working, so
Yeah.
I just have to talk louder. One of the things I would like to do in that bill, and Mark Pocan, the congressman from Madison, and I have been working on together, is making sure that if you have a high interest rate loan, you are able to refinance that. The other thing I would like to have done that I think would affect the amount of student loan debt, I talked to somebody in a private college. Years ago, they had tried to have students sign off with them before they took out another loan. Eventually, the government told them they couldn't do that, and they had to let the students take out as big a loan as they were eligible for. But they felt that people, and this is true because it was true when I went to school many years ago, 40 years ago? Sometime I think students take out loans bigger than necessary to a certain extent to support a lifestyle bigger than necessary. This person felt that we could reduce the amount of student loan debt by 20 or 25% if the universities just had to sign off. And sometimes they'd say, hey, wait a minute, you don't need $10,000 this year, you need $7,000 or whatever. So that's one of my goals there. We'll see what will happen. We tried to get the higher education, an additional higher education bill done last session when the Republicans were in charge. At that time, one of the reasons it didn't get done is the chairman of the Senate Education Committee, Lamar Alexander, didn't express a lot of interest in it. Lamar Alexander is not going to, we don't believe is going to run after the next 2 years, so it's his last chance to do it. And oddly, I think there's a better chance of getting something done now with the Democrat chairman than with my Republican chairman in the past. But it's something I look forward to working on. On the Oversight Committee, we're spending some time dealing with so-called scandals. There was a hearing with Michael Cohen was before us, that sort of thing. It'll be high profile. I hope we get some more business-related things done in that committee as well. Oh, by the way, the other thing on the Education Committee, Betsy DeVos was testifying before that committee last week. There were a couple things I want from her, and I got the right answers that I wanted. One thing, over time, we are having more and more dual enrollment type classes at a high school level, where you can begin to get credit with college or credit with tech school, so that when you begin to go on to your next degree, you're already off and running, don't have to stay in school for so long. Sometimes we have a problem with accreditation with the people teaching there. Nancy DeVos said she'd try to do what she could to help us in that regard. The other thing we were looking at is with regard to what used to be called sheltered workshops or work centers. We deal with Lakeside Packaging here in Winnebago County. There are people who want to basically shut those down as far as the workforce are continued. I think those people are well-meaning people, but I think that would be a big mistake. I think anybody who tours facilities like that, they make you feel very good because you see people who've been dealt with kind of you could say a tougher opportunities in life than a lot of us have dealt with, but nevertheless they're very happy, they're enjoyable earning a paycheck, they get the satisfaction of work. I think that the people who want to shut them down are making a mistake for a variety of reasons. Betsy DeVos has not yet even toured a facility like that, but she promised me she would tour one, and I think if you see them, you can't help but think that we want to keep them open. So in any event, that's a little bit what's going on. The other thing I will say, sometimes people tell me, do you get anything done in Washington? Do you get along at all? We get along fabulously. We really do. I think I have a good relationship with a lot of the Democrats over there, and I think every week that I'm back, we pass 6 or 7 bills. They're just not bills dealing with the most important pressing issues in the country.
Exactly.
You know, we don't pass a bill on immigration reform, which will kill the country if we don't solve it. We don't make progress on the government debt. We haven't made progress on health care. But as far as on a daily basis, we get along very well. We pass a variety of lesser bills, and together a relationship with a lot of people over there. Okay, now, should we open things up for questions?
Yep, Sadie will randomly draw those questions, and when she calls your name, feel free to ask your question to the congressman.
And I'll apologize ahead of time if I butcher your name, like this first one. John Blasek? Blazek?
John.
Maybe not John. Tom.
Lou.
Lou.
Easy one.
Handwriting that bad.
You're up.
Yeah. The other night, Matthew Desmond was in town, and Matthew wrote the book Evicted. He was at the Menasha High School, and he posited that our nation will never make any progress in terms of whether it's Appleton, Nina Menasha, and eliminating poverty or nationally, because people, as a nation, we have to find ways to reduce people's outlay for housing. No one can afford to pay 60 to 70% of their income for bad housing. And further, because they live in these situations where they're spending that much, they're much more, they grow children that are depressed. Their children, they're constantly moving. Oftentimes they wind up in our prison system. So I'm wondering, do you have like some concrete or some view about, like Wisconsin, we have, our children, there's 25% of our children here in Wisconsin live in poverty. So what is your take on?
I read the book and I met the author.
Yeah.
And it's a very well-written book. I enjoyed the book all the way to the end, and at the end I thought he reached some wrong conclusions. We have a lot of low-income housing in the state of Wisconsin through what they call Section 42 tax credits. Without the government really doing a lot about it, we keep building more and more and more. Already in this country, we have many different programs which are what I'll call means-tested programs. Okay, be they food share, be they Badger Care, be they Pell Grants, be they, what do we call replace the FTC? TANF programs. And a problem with all of these programs, an inadvertent problem, but a problem with them all, is in order to get these programs, you either can't work that hard or you're in trouble if you get married. Right now, the Section 42 housing in this state, which is housing built by real estate developers that is heavily subsidized by the government, is these buildings are, as a practical matter, nicer than the buildings that than the apartments that a lot of people live in, okay? And that's a problem. Because we do want people achieving their full potential working-wise, and we do want people, well, there are many wonderful single parents out there, we don't want to discourage people from getting married. And I think insofar as the government builds a lot of new income housing, first of all, new buildings by themselves are in general nicer, and the Section 42 credits, the way they're set up, encourage, quite frankly, the Section 42 housing is nicer than even other new buildings. I think, encourages that incentive. In that book, he is critical of the fact that right now under Section 8, particularly in Milwaukee, so the other people know, that book is about a guy, a professor from Harvard, was it?
Yeah.
Harvard, I think, who spent some time living in Milwaukee and seeing what he felt was some of the substandard housing was. And at the end, he felt we ought to build a lot of new housing, and also felt we ought to hire more lawyers to protect people from being evicted, right? And those are his two answers. And I disagree with him. I think when I've talked to, two things, when I've talked to people who deal with low-income housing here, there are two things they'll say. For one, we build more low-income housing here, and we're getting a lot of people here from Illinois, okay, and other places, and I'm not sure that in the long run, we want more of that. The other problem is, I was gonna say, the low-income housing here. Already, it's sometimes nicer than the housing than the people who administer those programs. Oh, the other thing that they told me is sometimes the people who move into the low-income housing, if you're talking about people with children, sometimes they move out of housing with grandma and grandpa. And I, at least, first of all, think I know of married couples who are living with, who sometimes have to live with grandma and grandpa when times are tough. And I'm not sure that therefore it's a benefit for the government to say, hey, wait a minute, you don't have to live with grandma and grandpa. You know, we'll set you up your own place. As a matter of fact, a lot of times it's better to live with grandma and grandpa. And inevitably, like everything else, when you set up one of these entitlement programs, that's what's going to happen. So it's a well-written book. I enjoy reading the book myself. I enjoy meeting the author, but I just think he's wrong on the solutions. And
So there are solutions, but possible solutions.
Well, I think one has to ask oneself, given the amount of money we're doing to fight poverty in this country, I mean, you can easily come up with examples of you know, someone with a couple of kids, the government's putting over $30,000 into that situation. You figure that amount of money, you should be able to solve the problem without further spending more money. It's not even spending the money that bothers me as much as I'm going to put enough money in there that you encourage people to live a lifestyle that isn't necessarily the best. And that's what's going on in this country. I mean, we have the war on poverty, or what I sometimes call the war on families. The war on poverty, which began in the 1960s, wouldn't everybody just about have to agree that it's failed? And I think it's failed. And it's failed not because people don't have food to eat or clothes to wear. It's failed because we have not addressed the lifestyles that lead to that poverty. We'll talk about it later. I'm glad you read the book. It shows you're on the ball. You've got an informed person.
Joel Schlachtenhaufen.
That's me.
Okay.
Yeah. I think many of us are concerned by, you could even say mushrooming, but the rise of fear and hate talk in our country. What are you doing to curb white nationalism? And what do you think we should be doing as individual citizens?
I don't think there's much hate out there as you think. I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I want to say that almost every family I know is being affected by some relative who has been absorbing the propaganda and is spewing fear and hate, whether it's toward Muslim people or toward black people or toward Native Americans from Guatemala and Honduras. Every congregation I know of is dealing with this and having to grapple with it, having members who are inclined to fear and to hate people. I'm sorry, it is an issue that we are facing, and it's not just in the U.S., it's a global concern throughout Europe.
Well,
people are having to deal with the rise of right-wing extremism. We're grappling with it. So we need some help from people like you who have a voice.
Well, first of all, within Congress, like I said, I think we get along. We get along.
Yeah.
On a day-to-day basis, there's nobody I deal with that I hate. And I don't think anybody hates me.
I'm talking about fearing and hating people on the margins, perhaps?
I do think, more than any time in our country, we are not enforcing our borders. I don't think hate is the adjective I'd use to people who think we should enforce our borders, but admittedly, I think compared to historically, we have a lot of people coming across those borders. And people want us to do something about it, just like every other country would. And I think if we would ever build a wall and deal with some of these asylum laws so that people knew that we could be measured about the number of people we're taking in this country, I don't think it would be an issue. Right now, as you know, I think I mentioned before, 700,000 new people are sworn in this country every year. I don't hear anybody complaining about those 700,000 people, not one. We have 4 million people in this country here on work visas. I don't hear anybody complain about that. I do think there are some people who traffic in divisiveness. You know, one person I've been publicly critical of is a guy by the name of Al Sharpton, who has been elevated in this country, and I don't think he should be elevated in this country. If you Google things like the Crown Heights affair, or Freddie's Fashion Mart, I mean, this guy has, I think, caused people to die. And it bothers me when politicians stand with somebody like him and promote him. But I don't hear a lot of hatred out there. I deal in political circles, obviously, all the time. I don't know anybody who I would describe as a white nationalist that we would run into. I'm sure in today's world with the internet, you can find somebody who will say anything, but it's not widespread. You know, you can hang around with this group, I'll hang around with chit-chatting with afterwards. We got, whatever it is, 60 people in the room, 70 people in the room. I'd be shocked if anybody comes up to me and is as you described. And this is probably a pretty good cross-section of the type of people who live in the 5 cities. There are people who like to say that there's this huge wave of anger out there and try to fire up people for political purposes, but I don't really think that that's true, or I would run into these people. And I don't, maybe they're bad people in other states, but at least in Wisconsin I don't see them. I don't see people walk into my office, either in Fond du Lac or in Washington, with what I'd call a racist agenda. I just don't see it. I think there are people, for political purposes, who want to say that's happening, but I'm not sure that's the same thing as that happening.
Lynn Koss, right here.
Oh, by the way, one other thing. When you think about it, America on its face has to be one of the least racist countries in the world. Because we are people from all over the world, right? I mean, compared to other countries where almost everybody has lived there for, or his descendants lived there for thousands of years, in America, we are a collection of people from all around. And I'm, therefore, obviously, I think America's a more accepting society than other places around the world. Okay, I'm sorry, you're on this.
First of all, I want to thank you for your work on behalf of Lakeside Packaging. We have a special needs daughter and it really concerns us, so I thank you for that. My concern is the president, basically. When I hear the daily lies and exaggerations and the talk about he's the smartest person there ever was, and he can fix everything, and he lies so frequently, what do we tell our grandchildren when we're supposed to respect the President of the United States? And I personally have no reason to respect him because of his actions.
There is,
And how can you continue to support him?
there is good and bad in everybody. I think if you ever have a chance to meet him, if you ever attend a rally of his, I think he is in some ways a lot more in touch with the average person than the average politician. I think if you pay careful attention when he disagrees with Republican leadership, including my good friend Paul Ryan in the past, I think Donald Trump is much more for the average guy than the average politician. If you look at the debates on the tax bill, I think Donald Trump requests were much more aimed at the average guy than the average politician was. I have spoken to him about some of his tweets. Maybe we have a shortage of people speaking to him about some of his tweets. But, and I would even say that I think sometimes, this is probably true of anybody in an important position, I think some people around him like to tell him what he wants to hear instead of what he should hear, to be closer to the throne, so to speak. But I have, on some of your concerns, been vocal to him. And of course, I don't get to talk to him very much at all. I wish I could talk to him more. But I've also been very vocal to his staff. And they know, and I've been very vocal to the congressmen who do get to see him every week or every other week. And I think some of his comments could be more measured.
That's an understatement.
Eric Frederickson?
Yeah, do you support the president's efforts to repeal Obamacare? And if yes, what would you replace it with, and how would you ensure protections for pre-existing conditions?
Well, I do think Obamacare was a failure. As you know, when I ran on the issue, ran for this job, I thought we ought to repeal Obamacare. I voted for one plan after President Trump took office, and as you know, sadly, the ability to try to permanently change things broke down in the Senate. It's a huge problem we have anywhere in Washington, and that it's very, very difficult to get anything done. I think when we do replace it, we have to make sure the pre-existing conditions are taken care of. I think probably, I don't know the exact percentages, but I would think almost the majority of people, I don't know the statistics, over age 55, over the age 60, all have pre-existing conditions. So we can write it into the law to make sure that coverage is always available for people like this. For people with severe problems, in Wisconsin, we had the HRSA program, which was successful, and they got rid of it when Obamacare kicked in. I do believe that the people, in order to control, to have more affordable health care, you have to control costs. And I think larger businesses are doing a good job of controlling costs. They're able to do it because they have maybe 500 or 800 employees. To a certain extent, they self-insure, which means that not as much money goes to the health insurance companies or grabbing too much money in the mix. Okay? To a certain extent, we could duplicate that if we had association sort of plans. And I'd like to see something like that happen. Another thing large businesses do is they have on-site clinics. And on-site clinics, the financial incentive is sometimes not to do quite as much. And that would be a way to save money. I would like to, in some areas, look a little bit at the pharmaceutical industry, but I think we have too many drugs being prescribed in the first place, and secondly, the cost is kind of high.
So you wouldn't support a public option for people to buy into at cost?
Well, when you say at cost, I have a feeling usually there's a hidden cost there. That's the problem with public option. If you say a public option is available for everybody, basically what you're saying is the government will come in and be able to provide health insurance less than an association plan would. Almost on the face of it, either it's going to cost more, or if it doesn't cost more, it's going to be inferior. The whole debate is this.
But then shouldn't the free market let people decide whether or not they choose that option, which would either be a greater cost or inferior versus a private option? And shouldn't it just be on the table with everything?
Well, I don't think anywhere else we have a huge public, we don't have a public option for buying cars or a public option for restaurants, that sort of thing. And it's usually because public things don't work out as well. And I think if you look in countries in which all they have is a public option, England, Canada, whatever, people wind up coming here.
Well, I actually lived in the UK for 8 years and I loved their program. Some of the best health insurance I ever had.
Well, I just got done talking to some guy who came back and was here from England, and he told me the exact opposite, so we'll see. They did point out, obviously, just one person, I guess, for those 60s rock and rollers. Mick Jagger's having surgery. Where's he having surgery? US of A.
Paul Schrader?
Yes, I'm interested in the postal service,
Yes.
and that nothing is being done for them. They've been asking for changes in bills and procedures and that, and Congress has been ignoring them for years, about 4 or 5
Well,
years.
Like I said, it's hard to get things through Congress. It's a complicated issue. When I first got to Congress, the committee that deals with that, the Oversight Committee, had a champion who wanted to solve the problem. Chairman Chaffetz, who's now on Fox News, when he left, the committee chairman who replaced him, it was not a priority. The chairman had huge power. I am on that committee, but the chairman, like I said, is Elijah Cummings. I'll tell you what I'll do. When I get back to Washington in a couple weeks, I will personally ask Elijah Cummings whether he will make this a post office bill a priority or not. So far in that committee, to my disappointment, not 100%, but a lot of it is more political in nature, and that's part of the game. But the Oversight Committee does have authority over the post office, and I will make a point of asking him whether in the next 2 years he plans on holding hearings on that topic.
Elaine Hansen?
My question is, I'm here to support Wisconsin dairy farmers. Where are we? It's not good, and it's been that way for a long time. My dad, my grandfather were on the farm, and they had periods of time where it was really bad also. I recall that as a child. But this has been 5 years. Farms are selling out in Wisconsin. Is a sign of the time? Is the DMC going to be enough to assist them?
I voted for an agricultural bill, in
Right.
part because it's the most favorable bill, I'm told, to dairy that's ever been out there. Some people are gonna have to wait to get relief, but at least by June they should get relief. The underlying, and I do try to stick with Farm Bureau, I try to talk to Farmers Union, and to be honest, they don't have good answers for me, and they're the experts on the field. The underlying problem, which scares me to death, because I love farmers, is the salt of the earth. The problem is right now, we have, particularly in Minnesota, South Dakota, along that area, we have a lot of new 9,000, 10,000 cow farms going on. And obviously, there's only so much of a demand for milk. I will meet next week, or 2 weeks, with President Trump's trade negotiator, and again emphasize to him the importance that we wrap up all these deals, so we begin to, ship more dairy products to Mexico again. But the thing that scares me to death, I'm just being honest, is all these 9,000 or 10,000 cow dairies that are going up, I'm told, in Minnesota and South Dakota. And those dairies are producing milk at, their costs are like $14 per hundredweight. Okay, and right now, a lot of the Wisconsin dairies were producing at like $17 a hundredweight. And a few years ago, that was okay to make money. It's not okay to make money now. I've talked to farmers, I've talked to bankers who deal with farmers, and right now, I'll give you the answer you don't want to hear. I think if you know farmers who can get their costs down to $14, I'm told it can be done. Their farms will make it. Unless we outright ban these massive new dairies that are going up in South Dakota and Minnesota, I don't know what to do, because, they just keep producing milk. And quite frankly now, and something that scares me to death, they right now, because they aren't selling enough milk, they're making cheese and stockpiling cheese. So if you think our thing's gonna get better in the future, well, if we're stockpiling cheese, they're probably not gonna get in the future, because eventually they're gonna wanna sell that cheese. And it's very difficult. I know even when the farms go out, what they're getting for the cows when they sell them off, they thought those cows were worth like $1,800, $2,000 a cow. They're getting $500, $600, $700 a cow, so that's horrible, and I wish I had the answer. Like I said, insofar as I talk to the experts, I try to do what they tell me to do, or, you know, they're the ones who are paid to think about it, but it's not enough as long as those massive farms that are producing milk at 14, 50, 100 weight keep going up, and I wish I could give you a better answer, but that's,
Well, along with that is the suicide rate
it's
among
horrible.
farmers. It's the highest occupation of suicide. It's
It's
unbelievable.
horrible, and it is so horrible because it's something you've done your whole life. You're working your butt off. Some of these people never had a day of vacation, and despite living a perfect life, financially you're going under, and it's just horrible. I agree with you entirely, and you can see my frustration and where I think.
Well, there are people in Wisconsin that are really working towards it. And this risk protection insurance that's being offered looks like a really wise thing for a farmer to do. But that's another cost, you know? You have to pay premiums to have it.
Right.
Nan Gutierrez?
You understand the problem like everything else. I mean, these people are, these big farms, they just keep, they are able to produce milk for less, and that's the problem. And a lot of them aren't even in the state. The big ones are going up in South Dakota, Minnesota.
You have the power to stop them.
Nan Gutierrez?
Right now.
It's me. I was wondering, Representative, if you could just update us on the status of the immigration bill and where we are with things at the moment.
Well, I don't know what bill you're talking about. I voted for a bill, was I think last July. But there really right now is not a comprehensive immigration bill out there. And I am very worried because we have to do something. There are a lot of issues. You know, the focus was on the wall, but we have an asylum issue in which people are able to come here and they can be coached on what to say to come here. We have a problem with birthright citizenship, in which we are one of the few countries that allows somebody to fly here for China, have their baby becomes a citizen. Like I said, the border is a mess in so many different ways. On all of those things, from what I can see, it would take 60 votes in the Senate to pass a bill. And right now, there are a lot of people, more from one party than the other, though there are problems in both parties, that don't seem to realize that we have an immigration problem in this country. And there's no other way to put it. I mean, we do need immigrants, that's true. It's nice to let more people in the country, but there have to be limits to it, and we should be picking our immigrants. No doubt about it. We'll ruin our country if we don't pick our immigrants. I have been on record for getting rid of birthright citizenship. I have been on record as for the wall. And even if you spend $8 billion on a wall, the amount it's costing us every year for illegal immigration varies, but a lot of people say it's over $50 billion a year. So the wall's gonna save money, I don't. On asylum, we cannot keep letting people come here if they just say, basically, I'm fleeing a bad situation abroad. Because everybody's gonna come to the United States because we're such a wonderful country. It's not a horrible racist country, it's a wonderful country. That's why people keep wanting to come here. I think the solution is gonna have to come from a popular president who can drive through the solutions that we want. Right now, our president is not quite popular enough to do it. Okay? But we need somebody who will address the asylum issue, who will address the wall issue, who will address the birth issue. They'll have to address all those issues. And right now, if you're going to do it, you're going to have to get almost all the Republicans on board and some Democrats on board. And he does not have the popularity right now to drive that through. If his popularity were 57 or 58%, I think he could. Because we've gotta do something or our country's done. When I ran for this job, I thought welfare was the biggest problem. And it's still a huge problem. But I now think immigration is, because we cannot continue to allow hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people come here every year. You know, you talk to people in Arizona, you talk to people in Texas, it's a big problem. So that's what it's going to take, given the rules that we play with in Congress. I'll digress for a second here. In the House, we can pass a bill with a majority, but on certain issues, it takes 60 votes in the Senate, and immigration is one of them. Perhaps Donald Trump, by executive order, can do some things. I think he could be more aggressive at trying to get people who've committed crimes, you know, wrongly taking advantage of the welfare system, even illegally. He can be more aggressive about deporting those people, but in the long run, he's gonna need the Senate on board for some of that stuff, which means he's gotta be popular enough that people are afraid to vote against him, and right now they're not there
Thank you.
at all.
Kathy McCord?
Yes.
Along that same issue, why is there so many people that are coming across now?
I think for two things. I think Donald Trump's detractors would say they're coming across because they're afraid he's going to do something. I think part of the problem is, though, the word is out that you can come here, okay? Because we are not kicking out people. And I think to a certain extent that comes from some politicians who are making it clear that they don't want our immigration laws taken seriously, okay? I mean, if in the city of Milwaukee, our own city of Milwaukee right now, I am told, a few weeks ago I ran into a couple, he's a fireman in Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, you can't ask people whether they're here illegally. Okay, that policeman was sanctioned, or they did something with her because she did ask somebody whether they're here illegally or illegally. We have the governor of California saying, come to California for free health care. Well, when we have elected officials, sanctuary cities all over this country, elected officials publicly saying they want to get rid of ICE, isn't it just like advertising? Come to America and they don't enforce their immigration laws? I don't think this was going on 6 years ago, or even 5 years, 4 years ago, right? When the governor of Wisconsin says, I'm not going to let the airplanes from the National Guard fly over the border to see if somebody's sneaking across. I mean, what message does that send? It just really bugs me. And people have fought so hard to keep this great country. And nobody's saying we shouldn't have people here legally. But it's just very frustrating. Like I said, I believe some of it comes from the huge number of politicians who publicly say that there's no way you can take their words any other way, that come here, anybody come here, we don't care. That's the problem.
Dennis Kraft?
Touching on that same issue of immigration, I mean, Congress passes the laws, whether how popular Trump is or not popular. But I mean, you've got your Democrat politicians that seem to entice this, and I'm thinking it's for votes more so than anything else, not to pass any laws that would curtail that massive immigration influx here.
The Democrats, we have taken votes before saying something called sanctuary cities. And the number of Democrats who'd be willing to sanction sanctuary cities is what, 4 or 5 out of 200? That's the problem. But these are the cards we're dealt with. You know, right now, I was fortunate to come back, but the Democrats have a clear majority in the House. And in the Senate, you can't do a lot without 60 out of 100 votes. And that's who I deal with in Washington. I think there was a time when the Democrats were actually more vocal on immigration than the Republicans. Okay, when I was in the state legislature, the lobbyist for the Carpenters Union, he would complain all the time about illegals coming here and undercutting union labor. All the time he complained about that. He voted Democrat from what I know, almost always endorsed Democrats. That was the Democrat position in the 1990s and 2000s. you know, we can't have illegals here undercutting American labor. And now it's just,
But you also had a 2-year gap in there where you controlled the Congress, and Ryan did absolutely nothing, even though he promised he would, especially for the wall, after they passed the budget.
he could have been a lot more forceful. Although, it's not 100% his fault, because you gotta remember, to get something out of the Senate, under the current law, you need 60 votes in the Senate. Now, there are,
Or option, that they do on a lot of other things.
Right.
You have weak leadership in both houses.
I will agree that they have weak leadership. I will agree with that. Particularly the last session, very weak. Yep, that was part of the
You
problem.
had Ryan that was weak, now you got McCarthy, I think,
There are a lot of powerful special interests who can't understand the difference between legal and illegal immigration. That's a big problem. And they get the two mixed up, and as the result, they begin to, even the congressmen, begin to say, we need immigrants. Well, of course we need immigrants. We need illegal immigrants. But there are too many people in Republican leadership who can't understand the difference. I think that is accurate. And that is a problem that I have to deal with.
yeah, but.
Right now, we're in the minority anyway, but I think the only way to get around it, like I said, is to get a president whose popularity is so high that people are afraid to cross him. And because I think, and even Donald Trump, I think when he addressed the shutdown issue and the immigration issue, even his national speeches were not, I didn't think, quite good enough to drive public opinion. And usually I like his speeches, but those speeches weren't good enough.
So you still got the same party, the Republican Party, half of them people stabbing him, so how is he gonna pass something when his own party does it back?
You are right. That will come with popularity as well.
Chuck, Buchholz?
How do you justify the Republican tax cuts? They're now a big factor in going up our deficit.
I think the biggest problem with the deficit is the spending. I think the economy is booming right now. I think it's the strongest it is in my lifetime. I think the more people are working and the more people make, the more they pay in income taxes, the more they pay in social security taxes. I think on the deficit, and particularly with regard to social security and Medicare, if you want to solve the problem, you have to have a booming economy. And to have a booming economy, you would not have a booming economy if your taxes were out of whack with the rest of the industrialized world. I think if you look, even some of the comments from both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, well, they might not have liked that tax cut. I think even they would have agreed that particularly on manufacturing, we had to reduce the marginal rate, the marginal corporate rate, or the marginal individual rate on manufacturing to be competitive with the rest of the world and to get the economy to take off like it is. I voted for the tax cut. I would have made some little changes on there myself. I did make some changes to make it a little bit better. But overall, I don't think the economy would be booming like it is right now without that tax cut.
Thomas Walecki?
My question's been asked.
Carol Hamilton?
I guess I was gonna ask about the small farms and everything too, but I was just wondering what's happening. Weren't they supposed to vote this year pretty soon about that, agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the US?
I believe I will vote for it.
And where is it coming up pretty soon?
I think I'm probably gonna take it up in the Senate first. As I understand it, it was actually kind of I wouldn't say it's a public forum, but it was, I was with a prominent Democratic congressman. And he felt, because in the in the House, like I said, the Democrats are in charge. He felt that the Democrats were gonna hold out for more changes prior to bringing the bill to the floor. I'm not sure who wants those changes. I think it's the more progressive element within the Democrat Party, because at least in the meeting I was at, a more traditional Democratic special interest group would have been happy to vote for it right now. I've been on record saying I'll vote for it. Like I said, I don't pick when I get to vote for it any more than the minority. But I will be disappointed if we don't vote for it by the end of the year. And I think if they would bring it to the floor and pass, but like always, there are a given number of people holding it up because they think they have leverage to be even more aggressive with labor laws in Mexico, quite frankly.
The Chinese one, or the one with China, I thought sounded like it was coming really close to getting done.
Well, that, we don't know. Like I said, there could be exaggeration there or not. I think the first thing we're gonna vote on for sure, I believe, sometime in the next 6 months will be the Mexico-Canada thing. And I intend to vote for it, and I think it's gonna be better than what we had in the past.
Robert Bursick?
I think a lot of people that voted for you did so because, you know, they had a choice to vote for a Democrat or Republican, and they voted for the Republican because they like to see a smaller government. I've never been to one of these before, and I can hear all the varied problems that are coming in. And obviously that leads you to want to do something as a congressman, but how can we push some of this to more of a local level? And how can we get control of this, you know, growing huge immense federal government that makes
I guess just be more vocal. I think a frustrating thing about this job, I mentioned I'm on the education. Okay, one of the major bills they had before us already, which we haven't had it voted on yet, is a massive amount of federal money in building schools. There is nothing that could be obviously more a local thing, right? I mean, the idea that if the federal government would be responsible for putting an addition on the Menasha High School is preposterous, not mentioning just having a school. It is scary the degree to which congressmen believe that it's the federal government's job to build schools. We have, who some people think is the favorite to win the Democrat nomination, Kamala Harris. What did she come up with? A plan to have the federal government pay another, what was it, $12,000 a year per teacher. In asking questions of Betsy DeVos last week on education, no recognition that almost that whole department that they deal with should be dealt with on a state and local level. I am very vocal when people come in and ask me for money. I am very vocal in pointing out that right now, it may have changed in the last month, but it is we are borrowing around 19% of federal spending right now. And the state is sitting on the biggest surplus since I followed this sort of thing. I mean, the state's sitting on like a $1.5 billion, $2 billion surplus. The federal government's broke out of their mind, and every day I have people come through my office saying, give me more money. I think Donald Trump, he proposes budgets that are much more responsible than what we pass. And just like I said in immigration, I think to get a handle on this, you need a strong enough president to take Congress by the scruff of the neck and get him to pass something responsible. He's not quite strong enough now. Every year, President Trump proposes a budget, sometimes with cuts that are unrealistic, but nevertheless, every time proposes something responsible. And so far, every year, Congress completely and totally ignores it. I wish he would kind of bird dog them more and follow them more and say, I'm not going to sign this or do this or do that. But he proposes a more responsible budget, and then he kind of walks away from it and always winds up signing spending increases. And that's very frustrating, and I will agree with you. It is very disappointing the number of Americans who think it's up to the federal government to do everything. I don't know where they would get that, it sure ain't in the Constitution, right? But it's a very frustrating thing in this job, including very, very many nice, responsible people who come into my office and ask for money all the time. And man, the states have such a big surplus too.
So why don't we fix
know,
our
ask-
roads?
Ask, well, there's a good example. They've got a big surplus on the state level.
Let's fix our roads.
Sharam Rajamanari?
That's me. Congressman, thank you for co-sponsoring the bill in the previous Congress, HR 392, the Fairness for High School Immigrants Act. And as you know, it was because of the cases of Ross bill last year, and for totally reasons unrelated, the Ross bill itself didn't go through. And it had a huge, you co-sponsored it, and it had a huge co-sponsorship on the House side, 330 plus congressional people. And this year it's been reintroduced again by Congressman Buck, ranking member of subcommittee.
Yep.
And as you're aware, you've been a leadership on that issue. You know the issue very well. It kind of creates a fair playing field when immigrants are brought in and sponsored for their green cards. Today, it is illegal for any employer to kind of ask for the applicant's country of birth, race, religion, whatever. But the same thing comes into picture when the employer goes and sponsors for a permanent residency for the applicant. What this bill does is removes that by way of removing the country cap, which today is set at 7%, and few countries are kind of capped for about 150 years to come out with studies. So recently, Heritage Foundation also said this has to be removed. So the ask is, if we could,
Look at
this again.
Ken Buck's bill again. You're right, right now the current law is a disadvantage for countries that are sizable and populated. And it's ridiculous because a lot of times those countries have the smartest or harder working people, and just because, I don't know what country you're talking about in specific.
For example, I come from India, and my wife is from India too. I'm an engineer, hold 2 patents, and I'm unable to start a company here. I was wanting to start something in the portage area.
Right, if India were broken into 20 different countries, there'd be a lot.
Yes,
Exactly.
you got it, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think that's about all we have time for, but if you want to interact with people one-on-one for a while here?
Is there anybody else? We can take one more.
One more? Okay, go ahead, Susan.
Maureen Radel?
Actually, he's already answered my question.
Okay, well, I'll hang out here. I'm not gonna dart out here.
This morning, from CNN Business, they had fiscal 2016, ICE spent 3.2 billion on deportations. From a fiscal point of view, with 1 million people coming across the border, how much does this cost me?
I don't understand the question,
He'll interact
but we're done with that
one-on-one,
thing.
yeah.
This is just an individual
He'll stay
thing.
around for a while.